Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. This is Lexden's customer-centric mindset webinar series, and we're delighted to be hosting our second one today. Hannah Boneham is joining us. Hi, Hannah. How are you doing?
Hi, Christopher. Pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Look, so let me just set up the context of what we're doing in this series, because this is the second one, and then we'll come on to yourself, Hannah. And you can give us a little bit of background about your involvement in the space of collaboration. We'll go on and then have a conversation about the importance of collaboration in customer experience and ways of working. So we've been organizing this series so that we can showcase what we've identified as kind of the 7 superpowers of a CX leader. And hopefully my graphic engineer will be at my assistance shortly and share with the audience the slides that support it. But these 7 superpowers have been developed over a number of years. We've worked on them and really identified that when it comes to driving change within organizations, these 7 kind of behavioral traits are really important. And we've heard that through the leaders that we've been talking to over many years. In fact, it was about 30 interviews that we conducted. And on top of that, we've run about 50 podcasts, and we've gone through and extracted what we believe are the most important things. Now, within this space, customer-centric mindset is a focus. It's a belief system that we have, and it sits alongside 2 other key components when it comes to customer centricity. One of those is having the motivation, is making sure you're becoming customer centric for the right reasons. You understand the value that delivers. And the second aspect is having a kind of a sound methodology, an operating model to make sure that customer centricity is a leading business practice in an organization. When you connect that with the customer-centric mindset and you focus on the people agenda to ensure you can create kind of sustainability within an organization so that everyone realizes what their role is and how they contribute towards customer centricity, you go a long way. And much of that is dependent on cross-functional collaboration. So we're going to have a conversation about it, a couple of polls as we go through. And if we have any kind of Q&As, then I'll bring those up as well. But first of all, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Hannah Boneham, who is a TED speaker, which is always a privilege to have a TED speaker with us. And Hannah is the CEO of LeadWell organization, which is a specialist consultancy focusing on leading complex change in organizations and creating kind of thriving workplace cultures where productivity and success occur. So Hannah, welcome to the CX Mindset series.
Thanks, Christopher. As I said before, it is a pleasure to be here. And hi, everyone. I hope you get a lot out of today's session. Christopher, shall I take people through a little bit about my background and why you've invited me to be here today?
Yes, please. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I've got a background in organisational change, as Christopher said. About 16 years in complex organisational change, mainly in the public and voluntary sectors, with a significant focus on collaboration. It's been given many names over my career: engagement, co-production, co-design, but it's been the focus of my career in change. And I'll share a number of examples about how that's played out as we talk through a few questions today. I established LeadWell just over a year ago. We're a consultancy leading complex change to create thriving workplace cultures, as Christopher said. But what does that mean in practical terms? Well, we do your traditional project and program management, sure, but our unique offer is in co-designing, collaborating, if you like, on bespoke interventions such as leadership development, away days, workshops, and hosting conferences or summits. And collaboration is one of our values, alongside authenticity, courage, trust, respect, and impact. We don't sell cookie cutter products and services. We use co-design to work with our clients to initiate knowledge exchange through facilitation and coaching to deliver outcomes and to embed our skills and experience within their established teams. So we leave an organisation stronger than we found it by using collaboration to share our skills and empowering those we work with to confidently use their own. We also don't compete with other people in organisations who do something similar to us. we're really proactive in networks, both geographic and subject specific, to work together, to share best practice and knowledge, and to present the best possible collaborative offers to our clients, even if ultimately that means it's not LeadWell they choose to contract with. I just want to say as well, whilst I'm hugely appreciative of the label of resident expert, thank you for that. The thing about encouraging collaboration is owning the fact that no one can possibly know everything. So I'll share what I do today, and I'm really happy to answer any questions. But what I'm hoping is that I'll learn from other people too. So it should be a really interesting experience. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Thank you, Hannah. And I think probably, I mean, by osmosis, you're that expert because, you know, you're working in that environment. I think you make a really important reference there as well in terms of collaboration, and perhaps it connects with other things such as integrity. But, you know, sometimes when you collaborate around in a group, you come to the conclusion that actually this group dynamic will work better without us. So actually, to step back from that is a really positive form of collaboration. And that can be challenging sometimes for those who have stepped into a group, whether that's, you know, colleagues being invited into a group and then realizing, actually, we can't add value here, or an external organization stepping in. But it takes perhaps, you know, maturity. From my perspective, that means a loss of hair. You know, it takes a few years before you get to that place. And then you kind of go, you know what, you know, we need to collaborate when we can add value, but when we don't, then actually it's distracting and it can be quite disruptive for a group. So thank you for sharing that key point. That was really, really important. On a point of collaboration, my visual assistants have been able to retrieve the slides I wanted to share earlier. So if I may, I might just take us back a step just so that we had a bit of context what we were talking about.
With pleasure.
We were there, as I mentioned, we're looking at the customer-centric mindset. This is in the why we believe, you know, it has to be in us to actually see the value of collaborating and see it delivering outcomes. It sits alongside having a sound methodology in terms of how you bring the voice of the customer into an organization, how you ensure it's focused within the right prioritization meetings, those designing solutions from IT to supply chain logistics, understand how things need to be delivered to meet what matters most to customers, and then in terms of how you measure it and kind of evaluate the success you've delivered. The third part to this is about how we sustain customer centricity. It's not a project. It needs to become kind of a way of working. And really want to just make this point, because if we just talk about collaboration in its own right, or just the customer-centric mindset, it looks like it's not, you know, it's kind of a one-legged milking stool. It really does require all component parts to kind of come together. And let's be honest, it doesn't happen overnight. You know, if you're going to do this properly to avoid false peaks of adoption, it will probably take 2 years as a kind of a complete transformation. Depends on the organization, depends on the maturity. So just wanted to make that point. In terms of the actual customer-centric mindset, we jump to the next slide, then we can see how we've built this up. And these are the 7 mindset traits that we're talking about. As I say, it's come from a lot of work, really listening and understanding what differentiates true leaders in customer centricity. Jeannie Walters kind of coins them as enlightened. Those who are kind of, you know, support me, help me, help me deliver the change, as opposed to those kind of go and prove it to me. Why should I do this? They're a different kind of group. But those who kind of in that support me are those who kind of exhibit these traits. And if we just jump to the next slide, I'll just give a little bit more context to those. Today's one is collaborating to achieve more. We've touched on curiosity with a superb researcher, Tom Kerr, who was explaining to us how important curiosity is in the context of research. And we'll be coming back to visit other topics as well. And some of them will be, you know, we'll be looking to find, we have experts we work with, and others will be very open to anyone who's on this particular webinar. If you feel you're a resident expert in that space, do reach out and let us know. So that said, we can take that away. Thank you very much. And we'll start by kind of talking about the value of collaboration, because it's an easy thing to say. And actually, you know, why wouldn't you collaborate? But let's forget that. Let's just position it as an option. You do or you don't need to collaborate. So from your perspective, Hannah, when you're trying to get organizations to integrate and to work together, how do you present, you know, kind of the value of collaboration? And perhaps you could bring that to light in terms of maybe an example that you've got to share.
Yeah, absolutely, Christopher. Before I bring the example in, I just want to kind of contextualize that a little bit. So when I talk about collaboration, I'm normally talking about working with one of three groups. The first one's being your customers, which you've touched on already. Typically in UX or customer centricity, we're looking for the voice of the customer in everything we do. But how do you experience that? Feedback forms, complaint analysis, market research, focus groups. Collaboration is when the voice of your customer is fed directly into the change, service, or product development. So when I'm talking about collaboration with your customers, that's what I'm referring to. There's also collaboration with colleagues. So internal collaboration is hugely beneficial in organizations. Organizations where there's a strong sense of engagement and participation, they have higher retention rates, lower staff sickness, greater levels of creativity. The list goes on and on. The thing that LeadWell are most often asked to do or asked to improve when delivering organizational change is staff engagement. And I've been thinking recently about, you'll all be aware of Google's 20% time policy, allowing its employees to dedicate 20% of their time to working on projects that they're passionate about. Well, I'd love to come up with some sort of equivalent to promote collaborations. If anyone's got any thoughts, please drop them into the comments. The last group that I like to talk about collaboration around is what would be traditionally known as your competitors in the market. So at LeadWell, we try to think of people and organizations who deliver things that are similar to us as potential collaborators, rather than thinking of them as competitors. I realise that there are circumstances in which that might not be practically applicable. Although I should say, if Coke and Pepsi decided to collaborate on a new drink, I would rush out to buy it, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. But if you think creatively, in whatever context you're coming at as you watch this, you may find that there are some productive or even lucrative opportunities to collaborate. So for LeadWell, we may want to bid for a piece of work that's just too large for us on our own. We may have a collaborator who might not be able to make some existing client kind of commitments and would like to recommend us, or we could create a product and service together that would bring together the very best of our worlds. So for example, a larger consultancy might want to collaborate with us as a smaller partner to get insights into the local market. There are so many amazing collaborations, and I mean, just to name a few: Lennon and McCartney, Ben and Jerry, Lego and everyone. So I'm sure you can find similar opportunities in your worlds or contexts. And in terms of that value of collaboration, well, there are so many advantages to do it. Off the top of my head, it improves the quality of everything that you're working on. The opportunity to bring other people's perspectives in, because no one's got all of the answers. Collective wisdom is so much more valuable than one person. And it also creates the ownership of any change that you're delivering. So staff are more likely to take ownership and to commit to achieving targets associated with something that they've collaborated on. Customers are more likely to share knowledge of the product with the networks that they're involved in, even if all they're doing is telling people about a time they gave feedback to a company and the company clearly took that feedback on board. They'll share that because they have ownership of it. And it also builds capability. Collaboration really helps improve the strength and skills and quality of your organisation. The process itself has value, even if it's not the outcome that you're looking for when you collaborate. I've collaborated on pieces of work that ultimately didn't proceed to delivery. You know, sometimes the collaboration proves that that's not viable, which is useful in itself, so you don't waste time and resources. But during the process, we've learned things and we've built networks for even more effective collaboration in the future, which touches, Christopher, on the point you've already made about customer centricity done properly is done consistently and takes time to build up. And that brings me on to my practical example. So I'm starting with a slightly less than traditional one here, perhaps, because this wasn't exactly a carefully thought through opportunity that I'm going to talk to you about here, but it illustrates that point that collaboration is much more powerful as an ongoing thing, not something you do just once. So I worked with a really large voluntary sector organisation delivering right across the UK, which is where I'm based, to roll out a nationwide digital solution for incident reporting. I honestly thought we could not possibly have collaborated more. I was really proud of the effort, a huge amount of collaboration. And this was pre-pandemic. So I travelled the length and breadth of all 4 countries. And it was a really amazing experience. I met loads and loads of people. The energy and the enthusiasm behind the delivery was just fantastic. And then it went live. And almost immediately, the intranet forums were live with this cohort of people who absolutely hated it. They were fuming. They're really, really dissatisfied with the solution that had been rolled out and their expectation that they use it. Now, this is actually quite typical in change. Anyone who's ever worked in any kind of new product or delivery will know that when you launch something, it's never universally accepted. But because this organisation had put in previous efforts consistently over years to promote collaboration, these people felt safe to share their concerns in a public forum, and they had the mechanisms with which to do that. And what that meant was I was able to access their feedback, and I was able to contact each of them individually to thank them for sharing their views and to invite them to help us iterate the live version to improve on it. And those people became some of our strongest allies and promoters. So it just shows that when you've got those mechanisms and that space in place, it gives you the opportunity to collaborate in ways that you couldn't even have anticipated that add huge amounts of value.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous, excellent. Thanks for that context. It's really important kind of to set that up. But nothing brings it to life like a real example. And I wanted to share to support the points you're making. A couple of examples, which okay, they're outside of customer experience, but it just goes to show just how socially impacting collaboration is. And some people may be aware of an organisation called Gavi, which is a private and public sector alliance. And they've been going since 2000. And by collaborating with many different governments across the world, they've been able to save, they've estimated 15 million lives by issuing nearly a billion vaccines free of charge to those in need. So, that only happens through that collaboration. And on a more, for some, maybe a more serious, but be honest, it's more frivolous note, the USA, Mexico, and Canada decided to collaborate and compete for the 2026 World Cup bid. And they kind of looked and said, actually, any one of us taking this on is a massive financial burden, and it's going to be difficult. But there's real economic benefit in pockets of each of our countries. So that collaboration came together, and that story of collaboration is apparently what won the bid for them. So it's happening around us in many places. I mean, I'm fortunate. I'm involved with something called the Customer Experience World Games, which is a not-for-profit movement which we bring together players, CX professionals from across the world who volunteer their time, and we positively compete in teams to actually create improved experience outcomes for charities. And it's been going for 4 years now. We've helped about 30 charities. And the way it works is you throw people together who've never played together, never worked together before, from different organizations from different parts of the world. And we say, create a solution. And what they all come back and say is, it only worked because we collaborated. They go into it with no imperative, no commercial expectation of what they're going to get out of it. They just volunteer their time. And when some of those barriers are pushed aside, it's amazing kind of what can be achieved. So it's something that we've observed. We even had a professor who wrote a paper on it to demonstrate how team dynamics can work even in environments where it shouldn't work, when there's no commercial imperative. People who don't know each other, have no appreciation of each other's strengths and skills, can actually create great outcomes. So collaboration, I think that we're going to share. There are kind of some rules to collaborations, or some frameworks, principles, as you say, but actually it's for all of us to do. And when we were talking beforehand, I was mentioning that sometimes age can be a barrier. When you're young, it's kind of seen as a, is it wrong for me to collaborate? Does it demonstrate I don't understand? But actually it's the opposite. It's a strength. As we get older, we realize it's a strength to be able to reach out and bring new expertise in. So it's really important. From a commercial perspective, we've been involved in a global customer-centric transformation for about 4 years. And we've been working in collaboration with organizations like Accenture to ensure that the improvements that the customers are needing are delivered, and at the same time, capability and ways of working happened. And that collaboration has required use of tools like, agile and sprint methodology, but also a really healthy respect about what you bring to the table and your complementary skills, and also allowing each party and the clients involved in this as well to extend their belief in terms of improvements that they can make, perhaps beyond where they normally sit. And you find that those different perspectives are really, really important. So, but very valuable, I think. Lots of value to be delivered. And from a customer centricity perspective, sometimes, and forgive me if anyone is sitting in a role holding on to this belief system, but after 20 odd years of doing this, I have a particular view on it. And sometimes in customer centricity, we believe our responsibility is to deliver the change. but actually we're not with a glue. We kind of make it happen. We bring the voice of the customer in, we help people to hear it, we help the organization identify what its changes it needs are. And on the back of that, those experts responsible for the change can make that empowered change. That is collaboration at its best. It really is. So lots of value that can be delivered from collaborating. One of the things to consider is, how you bring the customer into the organization to get that collaboration. We always talk about bringing the voice of the customer into the business, but there's some that might be quite a scary, daunting thought. How do you actually bring the customer into the business? So that's something I'd like to just talk about very quickly, if I may, Hannah, in terms of, ideas on what you do to bring the customer in and start collaborating with them. How can you do that?
Yeah, sure. I have to say I really love the balance that we're going to get in this session between the kind of public and the private sector, because I'm going to talk a little bit now about an example from adult social care, which has been my background for a number of years. It's where I've worked for some of the projects that I've delivered on over my career. So I think it should complement some of the examples that I know that you're going to bring, Christopher. There's a concept within adult social care and in the wider world as well, but it's particularly prevalent here, called co-production. Now, co-production, a lot of people talk about it as being a kind of collaboration, but it's more than that. It's the elite form of collaboration, if you like. It's where you bring the problem to your customers, not just a proposed solution. You invite them to be an integral part of the problem definition, the discovery, solution design and delivery. And for something to be genuine co-production, your customers need to be part of the leadership and the governance of the change. And the whole process needs to be fully accessible to them. So in the case of social care, sorry?
No, you're good. Carry on.
Sorry, there was a moment there, a bit of feedback. Yeah, so in the case of adult social care, this means ensuring, for example, wheelchair accessible meeting rooms, papers in plain jargon-free language for customers to see themselves represented in the outputs that you develop. So that brings me to my example. Some years ago now, I was commissioned to design a new look and feel for a new approach to adult social care that gave recipients more choice and control of the support. Now, important note there, I personally was commissioned to individually design this product, this solution, this look and feel. And it's interesting you talk about confidence and age, because I very much felt that pressure that I needed to get this right. And I knew I couldn't. I had enough now to realise I wasn't the right person to do that. I've never used adult social care. So it was too late to use full co-production in this context, but we certainly attempted a truly collaborative approach. So we advertised for participants who had been through this pilot programme locally, and I sat them down directly with a designer who had responsibility for developing look and feel for a load of successful campaigns in the past. This is interesting because you mentioned earlier, Christopher, about knowing when to be in the room and when not to be in the room. And this was a mistake I made on this occasion, which again, I'll put down to my experience. I then left the customers, I left the recipients and the designer together in the room. I left them alone for an hour and I thought, great, they're going to talk about their experience. This designer can get all this rich kind of feedback and reflections, and they can build something genuinely collaborative without my influence as the professional in the room. And I really thought that was the right way to go about it, as close to co-production as I could get. I came back an hour later to drafts, which I will describe them. It was a draft of a huge ethereal hand scooping a stick person out of a cage. And this was the look and feel for adult social care. And I'm sure I absolutely understand and appreciate how they got to that point. They were sharing their ideas about how now that they had more choice and control, they felt that they had greater freedom, and love that. But I'm sure everyone on this call can appreciate the optics of such graphics might not perhaps be fully appreciated by everybody that might interact with adult social care. So I learned a lot from that process. What I needed to do was to have broadened the group to include recipients who hadn't yet been through the pilot process, and also to include representatives from other parts of the process, so for example, service providers. And I needed to stay in the room as that expert and help them focus the conversation. Now, you can do that without influencing the outcome of the process. You can ask really helpful, collaborative, open questions like, what would have made you engage with us if you didn't already know about adult social care? Or what colours do you associate with adult social care? What colours did you associate from the old way of working, and what do you associate now? For example, the result, of course, we did that. I expanded the group. We ran everything again. We talked about a second iteration, and the new look and feel that we eventually settled on collectively with the original group as well. It had brighter colours that represented positivity, more informal graphics representing that choice, and it included, really importantly, diverse photographs of real people who were real recipients of adult social care in that local area. And to do that, we ran a photo shoot, which to this day is one of the best days of my working life ever. Just brilliant, absolutely brilliant fun. And those photos then were, of course, available to be kind of used in perpetuity, which was just brilliant because people were literally seeing, their friends and neighbours represented in the literature that local authority shared. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an example from my public sector background.
I think it's very important to understand that, it's easy sitting the other side of the fence. And well, of course, that's what you would do. But you painted the picture, show how challenging it was to kind of get to that place in the first instance. And I think we should recognise that you can't just go, right, we're going to co-produce, we're going to collaborate, let's bring the customers in. But actually, it's a journey of building confidence to allow those around who are skeptical of collaborating with customers. And your point you made earlier about competitors is really, really interesting. I've done some hackathons before where you can't solve an industry problem and you bring competitors in. But once you have a little bit of jostling and get past that, actually you've got the ideas in the room. So it's really important to do that. I think from our perspective, I'd like to share from different areas where you bring the customer into the collaboration piece. Very much, obviously you're getting the feedback from the customer, you're hearing what they say. You could class it as collaboration, but actually when it really is the collaborative part is then when you start to organize what that means and you start to unravel it as a practitioner and putting it down. It's at that point that you want to have the customer with you to say, have I interpreted this correctly? Now that in some organizations, obviously you can use customer journey mapping. And one of the mistakes I think people make is to perhaps think, I've got the intel, I'll now map the journey. But it's then you need to make sure with all these pieces of the jigsaw, have I put the blue sky in the right corner here, or should it be in that corner? You need the customer in to walk through that. And we did a very interesting exercise with one of the leading kind of building membership companies, one of these organizations that you get from the list of different builders and providers. And we first did a piece with their customers and said, what is the journey you go through? And internally was played back to us, well, that's not right. That's not what they should be doing. They should be doing it differently. And said, well, actually, how should they be doing it? And they explained how they wanted to do it. So they identified there were some pain points. There were some issues where they hadn't actually informed or laid the system down correctly. But then we stopped and thought, well, that's kind of interesting. That's the here and now. What about those who are thinking of coming on board? And we got those who are thinking of coming on board to come in and actually tell us what they expected it would look like. And it expected exactly what those who are going through it wanted it to look like. And the organization then realized that actually they needed to be collaborating, not just with current customers, because they would simply be fixing the workarounds for something they weren't particularly happy with, but actually needed to work with those who had an anticipation of what would look like as well. So a different group, bring them in earlier. So I think sometimes we're guilty of collaborating when we kind of identify what the challenge is. Sometimes you need to bring, and to that point, co-production, come in and say, what would the best kind of journey look like in this respect? And not only then when you're still organizing your thoughts, later on when you design the solution, you need to bring, don't assume, bring the customer back in, bring colleagues back in, just to check, are we designing the solution as we expected? How could you contribute to this particular piece? So I think it's important to always be looking and asking that question, how does this help the customer? How does this help our colleagues? It depends on what organization you are, but it might be how does it help community? But if you're always asking that question, there's an opportunity to collaborate and go and find out from somebody else. I think that's really, really important. Now, I mean, I'm guessing in your world, and we certainly come across it, you have people who, for good reason, will say it's just not possible to collaborate. It's a challenge to collaborate. So what we've actually got is a Menti poll that I think is going to come up onto the screen here. Have it in the comments, the Menti link. Let me just check to see if you've got that. If you could, yep, there's a Menti link there. If you could go to the Menti link and you could go to the code, if you could just answer for us which of these particular reasons you hear as being a reason for not being able to collaborate. So what impacts your potential for collaborating the most? So if you just copy the Menti link into your browser and then put the code in, and then you'll be able to give us an answer. And then what we'll do is in the spirit of collaboration, we'll look at the one which scores the highest, and then we will give a view back in terms of how you can kind of get past this. Now, if no one wants to play, we've already got ideas that we can share on 2 or 3 of them that are particularly prevalent in the work that we do. So we'll see kind of what comes up.
I'll be interested to see this, because I crowdsourced this list when we talked about doing it this way, Christopher. So I spoke to lots of different people that I know put a lot of collaborative effort into the work that they do, and I said, what's the top thing that people say to you that stands as a blocker when you want to collaborate? And these are the 6 that they came up.
I've certainly heard them. Just randomly, you, collaborating slows things down, which is if you think about it, if you're carrying a heavy load and you get 2 people to carry it, you can go faster, but there is that sense that having more people is going to slow things down. It's the worry that sharing information with others is a problem. Now, this is a cultural, I've observed this over the years, that you have hoarders and you have sharers in organizations, and sometimes it's a culture thing. So obviously, if you want to collaborate and you've not pre-identified this organization as a hoarding mentality, collaborating is going to be a challenge. So sometimes you need to look at kind of some bigger change areas first of all, but that's one that we've certainly heard a lot. We're not looking to do anything new. We don't want any other ideas. Thanks very much. Kind of the, we'll keep dragging this cart along on these square wheels. It's fine. Don't worry about it. That sense of, I can't believe there's anything better out there. Sometimes there's that, and with good reason, organizations are particularly strong and good at things. There's that, we have the experts who have all the answers. We don't need others involved, and fair enough. There's a worry I've certainly come across. I think it's one of the things you pulled out, was that how do we know we can trust the voices of those that we bring in? And I think, there's a genuine concern here. They bring their own agendas in and their own biases in, and, how do we compensate for that? And then finally, kind of, no, don't worry, I know what the problem is. Just leave it with me. We'll go away and fix this. And kind of, that sense that I'm probably the world's best expert at this. Now, that's not to say that those individuals aren't coming with the best intention and they've got an objective or a brief to kind of complete. However, it is sort of a consideration that collaboration can actually result in a better outcome for all of those, really. Now, I wonder how we're doing on this. Let's have a look at our results then and see what came in.
Ooh.
All right, so we have a clear winner. It's not safe to share our information with others. So that point, I mean, it'd be interesting to know from those whether the hoarder thought was right, or whether, I used to work in with a Visa, and obviously Visa, MasterCard, American Express. It was a very small gang at the time. You needed to be very careful about sharing information. So it'd be interesting to see that one. And well, we already know what the answer is. So, the problem is, so we'll fix it. Maybe let's dive in on that one. It's such a clear one that sticks out there. The idea it's not safe to share our information with others. So and thank you for those who have taken the time just to give us some answers. They're much appreciated. So what are your thoughts on that? How do you kind of, answer that one, Hannah?
So needs to start with the caveat that many will be expecting, which is GDPR, or data protection, if you're joining us from outside of the EU. Of course, there is always some information that it is inappropriate to share in certain contexts. I no doubt either Christopher or I, we're not going to suggest otherwise. But there will be more that you can share than you realise. Some of this will be about attitudes towards sharing information rather than the actual can you or can't you question. So I think the question I would always ask when someone tells me this, and they have on many occasions, I would say, well, why not? and ask for a specific answer. If you get more of a, well, it's just not right, or we don't feel comfortable because you want to be quite challenging with them. You can do that professionally, of course, but the easiest way to do that is to just say, well, what can we share, and start from somewhere and build and grow. So a good example, in the organisation where I rolled out that incident reporting system, we had a lot of pushback around collaborating on that. There was a definite fear that sharing our numbers and sharing the quality of the existing system would reflect poorly on the quality of services, when actually it's quite the opposite. The collaborative approach to the delivery not only improved performance and meant that once we rolled the system out, we rapidly improved our service offer, but it also motivated staff to rise to the challenge because they understood what was at stake because we'd been transparent and collaborative. Another example in this is there was a real fear that risk profiles were defined and mitigated differently in different places, and that if that came to light, that also would reflect poorly, but also that the different language can alienate different parts of the organisation because it was so very geographically dispersed. So an example might be that remote working might be just the day-to-day norm if you're operating in the Highlands of Scotland, whereas in London, it's something that managers will be taking quite significant steps to try to mitigate, to make sure that you're not on your own in a big empty office. And what we did was, by collaborating, we actually worked out that the whole risk profile needed to be looked at organisation-wide. So we got that secondary benefit of the work that we've been doing, that we improved the organisation's entire portfolio and attitude and profile to risk, better suited the rest of the UK. And it also it created the narrative that explained any cultural divergences and ensured that everyone who'd worked with us had the tools to be able to use that narrative to make those explanations when they were needed. So it improved a number of different things, and that was just from kind of responding directly to the challenge of, well, it's not safe to share that information because of this. Okay, but if we do so, then how might it improve in this way? That's kind of how we addressed it.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, I mean, I think my experience and how we approach this is there's some crossover there. There definitely is, in terms of that, if you need to formalize it, then there's an NDA you can do. You can do a non-disclosure agreement so everyone realizes what they are or aren't talking about here. And certainly if you're collaborating with customers, it gives them real confidence that, the information they're going to share is going to be within a very kind of safe space. And that, I'd say, is kind of boundaries as well. So you make it clear what we are sharing and what we're not sharing here, so that there isn't a sense of concern and holding back. And one of the things we've done, which works really, really well in this environment, is to actually organize a sharing session where you bring to the table a personal challenge you have. And that personal challenge might be something related to, I can't get my dog to stop barking every time the postman comes. Or it might be, I just don't seem to be able to break that 30-minute time goal when it comes to my 6K run. Whatever it is, bring those things in to the room and ask people around the table what they think we could do to actually improve this. And what you start to find then is that people are genuinely giving you good advice and their experience in order to help you achieve a better outcome. And it's incredible when you get that kind of breakdown to really help appreciate, hang on a second, this is something I've been stewing over for a long time. And now someone who I've literally just met has got a really good idea that I'm going to go home tonight and try that. And I had the dog barking one, put a bit of black card against the area where the dog can see out. And guess what? The dog quietens down most of the time. So, it's really helpful to kind of get a demonstration of what collaboration looks like if people are worried about kind of sharing information. But also with that, be serious about your security protocols. Make sure that you create, if you're using a SharePoint or a Teams area, you make it very clear in terms of who does and doesn't have access here. And also make information available to people in an easy to digest way as well. Sometimes, we're worried about sharing the information. What we're sharing is oversharing. You can actually extract out of there the essence of what you want to share if you just package it in a slightly different way. So think about where you're sharing it, if you're going to be sharing it, and the protocols that kind of go with it. I think they're all really important things to consider. So hopefully that's helpful. I mean, it is a concern. And as I say, if culturally the business is one where we don't share anything. Our fear is that the competitor is going to see this information as soon as we say it or we share it. Then you need to kind of, address that in the first instance to say, do we want to be a hoarder? Do we want to kind of, not benefit from the opportunity of collaboration? Okay, great. So last area I'd like to come to is kind of, we've been talking about benefits and barriers. What about when it comes to kind of skills and capabilities? I mean, what do you, when you're working with teams, you must see kind of rising stars in there and think, yes. What are those skills and capabilities that you've identified are really good accelerants for collaboration?
So the first one, and actually couldn't follow on better really, from Tom Kerr's brilliant webinar with you a few weeks ago on curiosity, because that's got to be the first thing. People who have an inquiring mind and a willingness to explore what's being shared without judgment. And linked to that is the ability to ask open questions. So using those open questions helps to promote that sense of curiosity over judgment. For example, where have you seen this done well, or what would make you use this product? If you're interested in more, I'm developing a list, which I'll very happily share with people. My contact details will be shared at the end of this presentation, or this conversation. The next thing is people who are approachable. Everyone's going to have in mind what that means when they hear that word. It's going to be different things to different people. So your ability to flex in terms of your style. Extroverts and introverts will look for a range of different attributes to help them feel comfortable to participate, for example. So a top tip I find when you're collaborating in a workshop context is to double up. I'm quite an extreme extrovert in my natural habitat. I'm sure everyone's struggling to imagine that. So I often facilitate with a co-facilitator who has a much gentler approach than I do. It is fascinating to see over the course of, say, an away day, who approaches who in terms of who they feel most comfortable engaging with. The next thing I would say is your ability to network is really important. Your network is your potential list of collaborators. So forming great working relationships with people is key. And I could talk for over an hour on just this alone. We don't have time. So my suggestion would be play to your strengths. If you love meeting new people over carefully balanced plates of buffet food, then, feel free. But if that's not your scene, then maybe you want to start building up your LinkedIn profile and writing articles that people will then engage with you online. Whatever you choose, you need to lean into your authentic self, because otherwise it's not going to be sustainable for you. And that comes on to another, which is adaptability. So it's more so when you're engaging with customers, because they may not already know you, but people are going to need different things to be able to participate fully. That always rings true, but it's particularly important when you're asking them to collaborate with you. It implies reciprocity and equity. So you need to be ready to offer those things. You've got to be able to adapt to meet diverse needs. So, for example, a child-friendly workshop so single parents can bring their kids. Making sure you use the microphone, even if you hate it, because some people are going to need it to be able to hear you. Organizational skills is the penultimate one I wanted to talk about. Obviously, coordinating things like this can be really challenging. You need to give people plenty of notice, accessible venues. You also need to think, particularly this is the case if you are looking to carry out low or no cost collaboration, which is possible. Again, happy to have a conversation with anyone who's interested. And lastly, and in some ways maybe most importantly, is resilience. You won't always like what you hear. I won't lie, sometimes feedback and reflections I've received have really stung, but I try to remember it's not personal. They are responding to the collaborative product, not to me personally. And collaboration itself can protect you in these spaces. If you are the sort of person who gets sensitive about stuff like this, you've got to remember that what you're putting forward isn't yours. It's a collection of people's ideas. So when you receive feedback, those who share it with you may not say it, but the fact that they have responded at all demonstrates that they appreciate having been asked. Mm-hmm. And that was your job, not to gather endorsement for the collection of ideas you've presented, but to give these people the opportunity to share their views. So the fact that they've responded, no matter what they've said, that was your positive reinforcement for a job well done.
Excellent. I mean, I recognise each of those. I think that last one is a particularly important one. If I might just add a few more that kind of have come to fruition through the work that we do. Those who are prepared to experiment. is really important. And I like the point you say about, you know, finding those individuals in the organization you can connect with and work with those stakeholders. I've explained this before as a bit like, I think you used the word buffet, so I use the buffet as well, where if you see a buffet, when you see a buffet, it doesn't matter where you are, you make a beeline for the thing you're most familiar with. Oh, I like prawn toast, or oh, I like the cheese sandwich. Was actually, you know, which means dangerously within an organization, you might get 3 or 4 individuals who you feel really safe going to and they've got good ideas. But actually, as a true collaborator, what you should be doing is saying, I don't know what's in that vol au vent, but I'm going to give it a go. And you may not like it, but that's okay. But you've got to try it. And it's really important to not go to the same go-to people, but to bring other people in. Otherwise, you are collaborating, but you're not. You're just an extension of a very singular kind of collaborative piece. That's really important. The second thing is empathy. Quite often when we're looking at customer experience, there may be an issue the customer has that we're looking to approach and to fix, or it might be an opportunity. Someone has done some work before we got here, and they may be extremely proud of that work. And actually, it might have been the right thing to do given the context of the organization at the time. There is a danger with collaboration just to smash up what's gone before and not stop. And it's another one of our superhero traits, recognize what's been achieved and to understand that. So, you know, I've certainly seen it before where, why is he not involved? Well, because he created it in the first place. And I think he'll have bias. You know, it's dangerous. You've got to be very careful there. So having empathy for what's gone before and working out how you make that a strength rather than a shortfall is really important, I think. So those couple of things, experimenting and empathy, I would say are really important. The last thing is, you have to come at it with a naivety that says, I do not know the answer. Yeah. Even if you do have a pretty clear, as soon as you bring forward, here's the shape, and I literally just want you to color the box, that's not collaboration. You need to be very careful to make sure that you're basically just, you know, a collection of things on the floor with some paints and what's going to happen here. You need to make sure you hold back, and that's okay. You know, that's okay to present yourself as not knowing the answer. And after all, that's why you want people to come in. But if you go in and say, look, you know, we're going to collaborate here, I'm 90% of the way there, I just need you to push it across the line. Think about being a participant in that session. That doesn't feel like collaboration. So, you know, understanding, use this as a strength rather than as a kind of a tool to, I think you said about, you know, don't just fashion your own agenda. Well, look, Hannah, we're coming to the close now. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. I think we've had a good kind of canter around the topic here. We can't cover everything, obviously. And, you know, I think you've shared very clearly how you work with organizations and support them. So if anyone who's on this webinar now or comes back to look at it, here you go. Every particular way you can get hold of Hannah here, you can email her or go to the website. There's a QR code, take you to a LinkedIn profile. Having known Hannah throughout this process, if you've got anything you want to ask, she's very generous. She'll come back and give you the benefit of her experience and give you thoughts in terms of what you can do. I guess otherwise, you know, you wouldn't be a collaborator if you kind of said no.
Absolutely. And the extreme extroversion comes into play as well. I love talking to people. So if you're in two minds and you think you might be bothering me, you won't be, I promise.
Fabulous. Well, thank you. I don't know if you've got any final words on collaboration you just want to share. I mean, perhaps if, you know, you went back and met your former self who was standing there thinking, can I collaborate? What would you say to someone who's still finding it a challenge in their organization to collaborate with others?
You know, we've touched on it already, but the thing I would say is have courage, have the courage of your convictions. It is okay to say, I don't know. What's best is if you can bring a solution. And if you can't bring a solution, tell people how you're going to find one. And that's through collaboration. Like, it's totally okay. It's more than okay to say, you know what, you've asked me to do this thing, but actually, I don't think I'm the personally best placed, but I will be doing this, this, and this to get the answer that you need. It is totally okay to collaborate in that way. I've spotted as well, Christopher, I think we've got a cue.
Yes, I've just seen it as well. Yeah. If I read that out, if you want to have a go at this one, Hannah, that'd be great. Yeah. Okay, the question is, I'm wondering what strategies do you recommend for breaking down silos between departments? Classic, really good question. And, you know, and still in 100 years' time, this question would pop up again, I'm sure. So what are your strategies, Hannah? Let's hear your views.
So you mentioned one of them already. You talked about hackathons across your competitors. It's a brilliant thing to do within your organisation as well. So the first thing is, don't wait for there to be a crisis. Do this in what we might call peacetime. Do it when things are calm and things are okay. Set up regular opportunities for staff across different siloed parts of the organisation to work together. So it might be, I don't know, you say, we've got this particular challenge that we're facing as an organisation, and we're going to award a half day off to the team that can come up with the best solution. You've got this amount of time. The team has to be made up of at least 4 people that have to be from 4 different services or 4 different departments or whatever it might be, and get them to work as cross-functional teams. And what that means is they'll start to grow their networks because it's something that they want to do. They'll engage and they'll get into that habit. And when there is a crisis, they'll have a much broader range of people that they can reach to, and they'll be able to respond in a collaborative way. And they'll be kind of trained to do it in that way. They'll be kind of predisposed. That's my top tip.
Brilliant. I'd suggest, I put in the word fun here. We're about sort of 10 or 12 years ago now, we were asked by Radisson Hotels to come up with a way of getting all the different roles within a hotel to look at issues they were having coming out of their, I think it's their Medallia feedback data, and come up with improvements. And that was challenging. They got many different levels of seniority and part-times, that sort of thing. So we mentioned it earlier about the World Games. At Lexden, we love building games. So we built what we called at the time the CX game, and it's been around now for 12 years or so. And we've used it in many, many different organizations and different sectors, where basically you create a customer issue. You get your colleagues to look at the customer persona, and then you work through intentionally bringing people from different functions, looking at the issue and looking at how you would approach it typically from your function. And then that we've got a methodology which allows you to look at it from the customer's perspective, which creates a kind of a consensus. You're then working together, collaborating on the same agenda, the customer's agenda, and it always ends up coming up with a better solution. And it's a 45-minute game, and you go from hello Hannah, I've never met you before the end of it, kind of high-fiving and yes, we've done it. And it's really important, I think, sometimes just to take people out of their comfort zone. And we've found that that's worked really well in several sectors, from insurance to universities to agriculture. We found it works really well in that space as well. So a couple of really good ideas. Great question there. Really appreciate the providing of that question. Well, look, we're coming to the top of the hour. I'll have a quick look and see if there's any more comments, any more questions coming through. No, I think we're all good. Okay, wonderful. Great. Well, look, thank you, Hannah, once again. I really appreciate the work you're doing in organizations, but also for being kind of so open and sharing your experience. I'm sure it will be helpful for many, and I'm sure if people want to take up the conversation further with you, they can. Likewise, if anyone wants to talk to us further about the mindset traits, the operating model, or anything else we do here to help organizations accelerate customer centricity as a leading business practice, they're welcome to do so. We'll be coming back. We're not sure which is the next of the superpowers that we'll be entertaining, but we'll look forward to inviting someone, hopefully, who can live up to what Hannah's delivered today. It's a tall order, but find someone who's a resident expert in empathy or experimentation to, again, help you, our viewing audience, get some benefit from it. But for now, thank you, Hannah, and we'll probably leave it there.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to see you.
Take care. Bye-bye.